The autumn sun was setting over downtown Memphis, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple. It was just another Tuesday afternoon on Cedar Street, where small businesses were starting to close up shop and students were making their way home from various after-school activities. Among them was 16-year-old Destiny Williams, her backpack filled with AP calculus homework and chess club materials. Destiny had always been the kind of student teachers bragged about during parent conferences. She maintained straight A's while tutoring younger kids in math and science, all while planning to become the first person in her family to attend college. And her grandmother had always told her that education was the key to opening doors, and Destiny took those words to heart. That particular evening, she was walking past Richardson's corner store, just 3 blocks from home, when Officer James Barrett's patrol car slowly pulled up beside her. At first, she didn't think much of it. Police cars often patrolled this area, and she had nothing to worry about. But something felt different this time. The car kept pace with her steps, moving unusually slow. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" Barrett's voice boomed through his car's speaker, making Destiny jump. She stopped, clutching her backpack straps tighter, her heart beginning to race. She had done nothing wrong. She was simply walking home, just like she did every Tuesday after tutoring. Barrett stepped out of his car, his hand resting on his belt in a way that made Destiny's stomach turn. "What's in the bag?" he demanded, not even bothering with a proper introduction or explanation for stopping her. His voice carried an edge that seemed to slice through the peaceful evening air. "Just my school books and calculator, sir," Destiny replied politely, remembering everything her parents had taught her about staying calm and respectful during police interactions. "I'm heading home from my tutoring session at the library." But Barrett wasn't interested in her explanation. He stepped closer, his face twisted with unwarranted suspicion. "There's been reports of shoplifting in this area," he said, though no such reports had actually been filed. "Empty your bag on the sidewalk." Destiny felt her eyes start to burn with tears of frustration and humiliation. Other students walked past, some slowing down to watch, others hurrying by with their heads down. She could see Mrs. Chen from the flower shop coming to her door, phone in hand, watching the scene unfold with growing concern. "Sir, I have receipts for everything in my bag." Destiny's voice trembled slightly, but she stood her ground. "I'm an honor student at Central High. You can call my teachers or my parents to verify." Barrett cut her off, his voice rising. "I said empty the bag. Now." His command echoed off the brick buildings, drawing more attention from passers-by. Mr. Rodriguez from the cafe across the street had stopped wiping his windows, his cell phone now pointed directly at the scene. What Officer Barrett failed to notice in his power-drunk moment was that he had chosen the wrong time and the wrong place to abuse his authority. It was the hour when local business owners were closing up shop, when parents were picking up their kids from various activities, and when the community was most alert and present. Destiny began to carefully remove her books one by one, placing them gently on the clean portion of the sidewalk: AP Calculus textbook, scientific calculator, chess club notebook, and the children's math workbooks she used for tutoring. Each item told its own story of a dedicated student, but Barrett seemed uninterested in the truth unfolding before him. The growing crowd of onlookers had their phones out, recording every second. Among them was Mr. Thompson, a retired judge who had seen enough cases of police misconduct to recognize the warning signs. He moved closer, making sure to capture clear footage while staying at a safe distance. As Destiny placed the last book on the ground, her hands shaking but her spirit unbroken, she stood up straight and looked Barrett in the eye. "Is there anything else you need to see, officer?" she asked, her voice carrying a dignity that made several onlookers nod in quiet approval. Barrett's face reddened, realizing that his attempt to intimidate a teenage girl had drawn an audience of concerned citizens. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. "Turn around and put your hands on the wall," he ordered, reaching for his handcuffs. That's when the community's silent observation turned into active intervention. Mrs. Chen stepped out of her shop, phone still recording. "Officer, I've known this girl for years. She tutors my grandson in mathematics. This is harassment, plain and simple." Mr. Rodriguez joined in from across the street. "We're all witnessing this, officer. Every second is being recorded. Would you like us to call your supervisor now, or would you prefer to explain yourself at the precinct later?" The tables had turned. What started as Barrett's attempt to intimidate a young black honor student had transformed into a moment of community solidarity. Unknown to him, dozens of phones were already streaming the incident live, and police headquarters was receiving multiple calls from concerned citizens. As Barrett stood there, suddenly aware of the numerous cameras pointed in his direction, he didn't realize that his next actions would not only end his career, but would also land him in jail within the hour. The community had seen enough, and this time, justice wouldn't wait. The evening air grew thick with tension as more neighbors gathered around the scene outside Richardson's corner store. Mrs. Chen, the flower shop owner who had been recording since the beginning, wasn't just any ordinary witness. For 30 years, she had watched the neighborhood's children grow up, and she had seen both the good and bad sides of law enforcement in their community. "I've got it all right here," she said firmly, holding up her phone while dialing the police station with her other hand. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen, sending the live video to her daughter, who worked as a local news producer. Years of experience had taught her the importance of backing up evidence immediately. Across the street, Mr. Rodriguez had already contacted several other business owners through their neighborhood watch group chat. Within minutes, the owner of the local hardware store, the bakery owner, and 3 other shopkeepers had emerged from their stores, all with phones recording. They'd formed a respectful but determined circle around the scene, creating a wall of witnesses that would be impossible to ignore. "Young lady," called out Mr. Thompson, the retired judge, his voice carrying the weight of decades in the courtroom, "don't say another word without proper representation. We are all here as witnesses." He kept his distance but made sure his presence was known to Officer Barrett, whose face was becoming increasingly flushed with each passing moment. Destiny's school books still lay scattered on the sidewalk, her AP calculus textbook open to a page full of complex equations, a silent testament to the kind of student being harassed. A young boy on his bicycle stopped to pick up her chess club notebook that had blown slightly away, carefully placing it back with her other belongings. The growing crowd wasn't just filming, they were actively documenting every detail. Mrs. Peterson, who ran the library where Destiny tutored younger students, had arrived after receiving a text from another witness. She immediately began taking notes of exact times and events, her years as a librarian making her naturally meticulous about documentation. At 5:47 p.m., Officer Barrett demanded to search the student's bag without probable cause. She dictated into her phone's voice recorder. At 5:49 p.m., he escalated the situation despite clear evidence that she was returning from documented educational activities. The power dynamic was shifting with each new witness who arrived. What Officer Barrett had intended as a display of authority had transformed into a masterclass in community solidarity. Phones continued recording as he stood there, his hand still resting uncomfortably on his belt, but now his bravado was visibly cracking. A city bus stopped at the corner, and the driver, recognizing Destiny from her regular trips to and from tutoring sessions, opened his doors. "I've got cameras on my bus," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "And they've been recording since I turned this corner." He quickly pressed a few buttons on his console, making sure the footage would be properly saved. The witnesses weren't just passive observers, they were actively creating an undeniable record of events. Someone had started a live stream that was quickly gathering viewers. Local social media groups were lighting up with alerts about the situation. The incident was being documented from every angle, making it impossible for anyone to later claim there was any ambiguity about what had occurred. Mr. Rodriguez's wife, who taught at the community college, had begun collecting contact information from witnesses, creating an impromptu but organized list of people willing to provide statements. "Remember everyone," she called out, "write down exactly what you saw while it's fresh in your minds. Timestamps are important." The growing number of witnesses had created an unexpected shield of protection through their presence and documentation. Officer Barrett's body camera was no longer the only record of events. Now there were dozens of independent recordings, each capturing a slightly different angle, each providing another piece of irrefutable evidence. A young law student who had been studying at the cafe had begun quietly reciting relevant statutes about police conduct and citizens' rights, just loud enough for nearby witnesses to record. His knowledge provided real-time context for what they were observing, adding another layer of documentation to the unfolding scene. The community's response was organized yet organic, powerful yet peaceful. No one had raised their voice or made any threatening moves, but their message was clear. They were watching, they were recording, and they would not allow this incident to be swept under the rug or misrepresented later. As the sun continued to set, casting long shadows across the scene, the witnesses remained steady in their documentation. They had created an unbreakable chain of evidence that would prove crucial in the hours to come. What Officer Barrett didn't realize was that with each passing minute, as more witnesses gathered and more footage was recorded, he was digging himself deeper into a hole from which his badge would not be able to save him. The power of community witness had transformed what could have been another unchecked abuse of power into something very different, a moment where truth would be impossible to deny and justice would arrive with unprecedented speed. The next few minutes would prove just how quickly the system could work when enough people stood together to demand accountability. The videos spread across social media like wildfire. Within 30 minutes of the first upload, the footage had already reached the local news stations. While Officer Barrett was still standing outside Richardson's corner store, his career crumbling around him, something remarkable was happening across the city. Students from Central High School, where Destiny tutored younger kids in mathematics, were already gathering in the school parking lot. The chess club president had sent out a group message, and teenagers who had already gone home for the day were asking their parents to drive them back. They came carrying handmade signs that read, "Honor students deserve honor," and "Protect our tutors." Their chemistry teacher, who had stayed late grading papers, watched in amazement as more students arrived. "I've never seen them organize this quickly," she told the school principal, who had rushed back to campus after receiving dozens of messages from concerned parents. "These kids aren't just angry, they're determined to make a difference." The principal, a former civil rights attorney who had traded courtrooms for classrooms 15 years ago, knew exactly what needed to be done. She called for the school buses that were still running their late activity routes to be redirected to the police station. "We're going to show them what peaceful, organized protest looks like," she announced to the gathering crowd. Meanwhile, at the downtown coffee shop where Destiny often studied, the baristas had taped a simple sign to their window: "Closed early, gone to support our community." The shop owner, a grandmother of 3, was already handing out water bottles to people gathering outside the police station. "I've been serving coffee in this city for 40 years, she told a reporter who had just arrived. "I've seen things change, but never this fast." The crowd outside the police station grew larger with each passing minute. Parents brought their children, wanting them to witness a moment of community solidarity. Teachers stood alongside their students. Small business owners closed their shops early to join the gathering. What made this protest different was its quiet strength. There was no shouting, no anger-filled chants. Instead, people shared stories about Destiny. "She helped my son understand fractions when he was ready to give up on math completely," one mother told the crowd. "Now he's getting B's and thinks he might want to be an engineer." A middle school student raised his hand to speak next. "She stays after chess club to help beginners learn the game. She never makes anyone feel stupid for asking questions." The stories continued, painting a picture not just of one student being harassed, but of a community member whose positive impact touched countless lives. Each story added another layer of outrage to the officer's actions, but also strengthened the community's resolve to seek justice the right way. Local faith leaders began arriving, having heard about the incident through their community networks. They moved through the crowd, encouraging people to remain peaceful but determined. "This is how change happens," one pastor reminded everyone. "When we stand together with dignity and purpose." The crowd had swelled to hundreds when Destiny's parents arrived at the police station. They walked through the parting crowd, their heads held high, overwhelmed by the sight of so many people who had come to support their daughter. Teachers, students, neighbors, and even people they'd never met stepped forward to offer words of encouragement. Inside the police station, officers watching the growing crowd on security cameras could sense that this wasn't going to be business as usual. The peaceful yet powerful presence outside their doors sent a clear message. This community would not rest until justice was served. What made this response different from other protests was its immediacy and organization. Social media had allowed the community to mobilize within minutes, not days. Every person who arrived had a personal connection to share, a reason for being there that went beyond the incident itself. The local news crews had arrived in full force, but they found themselves capturing something unexpected. Instead of anger and confrontation, they recorded scenes of community unity. Students helped elderly protesters find comfortable places to sit. Local restaurants sent food for the gathering crowd. People shared umbrellas when a light drizzle began to fall. As the evening wore on, the crowd continued to grow. What had started as a response to one officer's actions had transformed into something bigger. A demonstration of community power and unity. The protesters weren't just demanding justice, they were showing exactly what their community stood for. Someone had set up a small table where people could write messages of support for Destiny. The stack of papers grew taller as more people arrived, each note containing words of encouragement and appreciation. "Thank you for standing strong," one read. "You represent the best of our community." The most powerful moment came when Destiny's chess club students arrived, carrying their boards. They set up impromptu games on the steps of the police station, a quiet but powerful reminder of who Officer Barrett had tried to intimidate. A dedicated student and mentor who spent her free time teaching others. As night began to fall, the crowd showed no signs of dispersing. If anything, it grew more determined. They had created not just a protest, but a living testament to the power of community. And inside the police station, officials were about to make a decision that would show just how effective this peaceful display of solidarity could be. Inside the police station's internal affairs office, Lieutenant Martinez was already reviewing the flood of video evidence pouring in from every direction. Her desk computer showed multiple screens of footage, body camera feeds, business security cameras, and dozens of citizen videos, all telling the same disturbing story. "Get me everything on Officer Barrett's record," she commanded, her voice steady but urgent. A junior officer rushed to comply, returning moments later with a thick personnel file. Martinez had been with Internal Affairs for 15 years, and she'd seen plenty of cases drag on for months due to bureaucratic red tape. But not this time. This time was different. The lieutenant's phone hadn't stopped buzzing with notifications. Local news stations were already running the story. Social media platforms were flooded with different angles of the incident, each video more damning than the last. The retired judge's footage had been particularly clear, capturing every word of Barrett's baseless accusations against a student whose only crime was walking home from tutoring. "Pull up Barrett's body cam footage from the last 3 months," Martinez instructed her team. "I want to know if there's a pattern." She'd learned long ago that officers who abused their power rarely did it just once. As her team worked, she could hear the growing crowd outside the building, their presence a reminder that the community was waiting for action. 2 senior investigators huddled around a computer, reviewing Barrett's previous complaints. "Look at this," one called out, pointing to a series of incidents that had been quietly buried. Complaints about aggressive behavior, excessive force, and harassment, all dismissed without proper investigation. The paper trail painted a picture of an officer who had been protected by the system for far too long. Martinez stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the peaceful protesters below. She saw teachers standing with their students, parents holding signs, and business owners who had closed their shops to be there. This wasn't an angry mob. This was the community coming together to demand accountability. The lieutenant's assistant rushed in with more evidence. "Ma'am, we've got surveillance footage from the last 6 weeks. Multiple incidents of Barrett targeting young people, especially minorities. The store owners have been keeping their own records." The evidence was mounting by the minute. In the tech room next door, specialists were verifying the authenticity of every video submitted by witnesses. "No editing, no manipulation," the lead technician confirmed. "These are raw feeds showing exactly what happened." They had already created a timeline, sensing footage from different sources to show the incident from every angle. Martinez watched as her team pieced together not just today's incident, but a broader pattern of misconduct. Store owners had saved security footage showing Barrett's previous interactions. School security cameras had captured his behavior around students. Even traffic cameras told part of the story. "Get me the chief," Martinez said, her decision made. She'd seen enough. As she waited for the call to connect, she organized the evidence into clear, undeniable proof of misconduct. This wasn't going to be another case of delayed justice or administrative leave. The evidence demanded immediate action. The police chief arrived in person instead of taking the call. He'd been watching the situation unfold and knew this was too important for phone conversations. Together, they reviewed the mounting evidence, the videos, the witness statements, the pattern of behavior revealed by Barrett's record. "Look at this," Martinez pointed to their screen. Security footage from the previous month showed Barrett harassing another student outside the library. He's been escalating. Today wasn't an isolated incident, it was just the first time he got caught on dozens of cameras at once. The tech team had created a split-screen view of today's incident, showing simultaneous footage from multiple angles. There was no room for misinterpretation, no way to claim the videos were taken out of context. The truth was clear and undeniable. Down the hall, the department's legal team was already reviewing the case. They didn't need hours to deliberate, the evidence was overwhelming. One lawyer looked up from his stack of witness statements and simply nodded. "This is beyond administrative action. This is criminal conduct." Martinez gathered her final report, knowing that speed was crucial. The community deserved to see that justice could work quickly when the evidence was clear and the will to act was present. She had seen too many cases get bogged down in bureaucratic procedures, but this time would be different. The investigation room buzzed with purposeful activity. Teams were compiling evidence, organizing witness statements, and preparing the necessary paperwork. They all knew they were part of something unprecedented, an investigation that would be measured in hours rather than months. Outside the window, the crowd of protesters had grown larger, their presence a constant reminder of the community's expectations. But inside the Internal Affairs office, Martinez and her team weren't just responding to pressure, they were fulfilling their duty to protect and serve by holding one of their own accountable. As she walked toward the chief's office with her completed report, Martinez knew this case would change things. It would show that swift justice was possible when everyone did their job right. The evidence was clear, the documentation was thorough, and the time for action had arrived. The police chief stood before the sea of cameras and microphones, his face stern with resolve. The emergency press conference had been called just 4 hours after the incident, and the station's media room was packed with reporters, community leaders, and concerned citizens. The air was thick with anticipation. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady and clear. "Today, an incident occurred that shook our community's trust. I'm here not to make excuses or ask for patience, but to take immediate action." The room fell silent, every phone and camera focused on his next words. Behind him, a large screen displayed multiple video angles of the incident, leaving no room for doubt about what had transpired. The chief had made the unusual decision to show the raw footage during the press conference, demonstrating a new level of transparency. "As of this moment, Officer James Barrett has been terminated from his position with our department," the chief announced. The crowd stirred, but he wasn't finished. Furthermore, he is currently being processed for arrest on multiple charges, including civil rights violations, abuse of power, and assault. The room erupted with questions, but the chief raised his hand for silence. "Let me be clear, what we witnessed today was not just a violation of department policy. It was a violation of human dignity, civil rights, and everything our badge is supposed to represent." He gestured to a stack of documents on the podium. "Our Internal Affairs Division has uncovered a pattern of similar incidents involving this officer. We failed our community by not catching this sooner, and for that, I apologize. But today, we're taking decisive action." The chief's words carried extra weight because everyone knew this wasn't just talk. Even as he spoke, Barrett was being escorted through the building in handcuffs, his badge and gun already surrendered. The system was moving with unprecedented speed. To the young student who endured this abuse of power, the chief continued, his voice softening slightly, "I want to say publicly that you did nothing wrong. You showed remarkable courage and dignity in the face of unprofessional and unacceptable behavior." In the front row, Destiny's parents sat with their daughter's AP calculus teacher who had arrived to show support. They listened intently as the chief outlined immediate changes to department policies, including enhanced community oversight and faster response to misconduct complaints. The chief then did something unexpected. He stepped away from the podium and invited community leaders to speak. The retired judge who had witnessed the incident stepped forward first, commending the department's swift response while emphasizing the need for continued vigilance. Outside the media room, the processing of Barrett's arrest was already underway. Officers who had worked alongside him for years now handled him with professional detachment, following every procedure to the letter. There would be no special treatment, no looking the other way. The booking officer photographed and fingerprinted Barrett with methodical precision, treating him exactly like any other suspect. Barrett's face showed shock. He had clearly never expected to end up on this side of the law. His attempts to talk his way out of trouble fell on deaf ears. Back in the press conference, the chief was announcing immediate changes to the department's training programs. Starting tomorrow, we're implementing new de-escalation protocols. Every officer will undergo additional training on implicit bias and community relations. The local news crews were broadcasting live, and in homes across the city, people watched with a mix of surprise and hope. They were witnessing something rare. A system responding to injustice with immediate, decisive action rather than delays and excuses. Community leaders in attendance nodded approvingly as the chief detailed plans for a civilian review board with real power to investigate complaints. This wasn't just damage control. These were substantial changes being implemented in real time. We're also reviewing all previous complaints filed against officers in the past year, the chief announced. Any pattern of misconduct will be thoroughly investigated. The days of looking the other way are over. As Barrett was led to a holding cell, he passed by the wall of officers' photos in the hallway. His own picture was already gone, removed within hours of his misconduct. It was a small but powerful symbol of how quickly things had changed. The chief concluded the press conference with a commitment that would be remembered for years to come. Today marks a new chapter in our department's history. We will honor our oath to protect and serve by holding ourselves to the highest standard of accountability. As reporters rushed to file their stories and camera crews packed up their equipment, the chief stayed to answer every question, no matter how difficult. This wasn't just about one incident or one officer, it was about setting a new standard for police accountability. The swift action sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. Other departments watched closely as Barrett was processed and jailed in record time, proving that the system could work quickly when there was the will to make it happen. The county jail's booking area had never processed a police officer quite this quickly. Former Officer Barrett stood in his orange jumpsuit, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. Just 12 hours ago, he had been wearing a badge. Now he was being photographed for his mugshot, his fingerprints carefully recorded in the system. The booking officer, a 20-year veteran of the department, maintained strict professionalism. Face forward, she instructed, had a voice neutral but firm. Now turn to the left. Each command was delivered exactly as it would be for any other person being processed into the system. Down the hall, the district attorney was already reviewing the case files. Spread across her desk were dozens of witness statements, photographs, and transcripts. The evidence was overwhelming. Multiple video angles, clear audio recordings, and a pattern of previous misconduct that could no longer be ignored. This is textbook civil rights violation, she told her team, pointing to specific timestamps in the videos. Look at how he escalated the situation without cause. And here, she gestured to another document. We have proof that he's done this before. In the jail's intake area, Barrett attempted to pull rank one last time. Come on, you know me, he said to the processing officer. We've worked together. But the officer simply continued with her duties, unmoved by his pleas. The system that had once protected him was now holding him accountable. The district attorney's office moved with unusual speed, preparing charging documents that would normally take days or weeks to process. When the evidence is this clear, we have an obligation to act quickly, the DA explained to her staff. The community needs to see that justice can work efficiently when we do our jobs right. Outside the jail, news crews gathered as word spread about Barrett's booking. The story was unlike anything they'd covered before, not because of the officer's misconduct, which was sadly familiar, but because of the swift and decisive response to it. Inside the jail's medical screening area, Barrett sat quietly as a nurse checked his vital signs. The same careful procedures applied to every new inmate were followed to the letter. There was no special treatment, no professional courtesy, just the standard intake process applied equally and fairly. The district attorney stood at her office window, looking out at the growing media presence. She had already decided to personally handle the case rather than assign it to a junior prosecutor. "This isn't just about one incident," she told her deputy. "This is about showing that the system can work the way it's supposed to." Barrett's attorney arrived at the jail but found no procedural shortcuts available. His client would have to wait for a bond hearing just like any other defendant. The lawyer's attempts to expedite the process were met with professional but firm reminders about standard procedure. In the jail's processing area, Barrett's belongings were carefully catalogued and stored. His wallet, watch, and personal items were placed in a plastic bag, each one logged into the system. The badge he had misused was now evidence in the case against him. The district attorney's team worked through the evening, preparing for the next day's bond hearing. They organized evidence chronologically, creating a clear timeline that showed not just today's incident, but the pattern of behavior that led to it. "Look at these complaints," one prosecutor said, spreading documents across the conference table. 3 separate incidents in the past month alone, all involving young minorities, all swept under the rug until now. Barrett's first night in jail was a stark reminder of the power he had abused. His cell was standard issue, a narrow bunk, a small desk, and a basic toilet. No special accommodations were made, no exceptions granted. He was now experiencing the system from the other side. In the district attorney's office, phones rang constantly as other jurisdictions called to learn more about the case. How had they moved so quickly? What procedures allowed for such rapid prosecution? The case was becoming a model for how justice could work. The jail's security cameras recorded Barrett's first hours in custody. He sat on his bunk, head in his hands, finally understanding that his actions had real consequences. The power he had misused was gone, replaced by the cold reality of accountability. Teams of prosecutors worked late into the night, ensuring every detail was perfect for the next day's hearing. They knew this case would be scrutinized from all angles, and they were determined to show that justice could be both swift and thorough. The evening shift changed at the jail, and new officers came on duty. Each one was briefed about the high-profile inmate, but their instructions were simple: treat him exactly like any other person in custody, no better, no worse. As night fell, the story of Barrett's arrest and booking spread across social media. People shared updates and commented on the unprecedented speed of the process. Many expressed surprise and hope, surprise that the system could work so efficiently, and hope that this might become the new standard. The district attorney made one final check of the case files before leaving for the night. Everything was in order for tomorrow's hearing. "This is how justice is supposed to work," she told her team. "When we have clear evidence of wrongdoing, we act on it, no matter who the defendant is." 6 months after that fateful evening outside Richardson's corner store, Destiny stood at a podium in the city council chambers. The room was packed with familiar faces, her teachers, fellow students, and the community members who had stood up for her that day. But now she wasn't there as a victim. She was there as the founder of Youth Voices for Change, a new organization working to bridge the gap between law enforcement and young people. "What happened to me could have been just another sad story," she began, her voice clear and confident. Instead, it became a turning point for our community. Behind her, a screen showed pictures of the youth police dialogue sessions her group had organized over the past months. The police department had undergone remarkable changes. The new training programs, implemented the day after Barrett's arrest, had become a model for other cities. Officers now regularly attended community events, not as authority figures, but as participants and learners. Mrs. Chen from the flower shop had joined the newly formed Civilian Oversight Board. Her experience documenting the incident with Barrett had shown her the importance of community involvement in police accountability. "We're not here to be against the police," she often said at meetings. "We're here to help them serve our community better." The incident had sparked changes in schools too. The principal of Central High had worked with other educators to create a Know Your Rights curriculum that was now being taught across the district. Students learned about civil rights and civic responsibility in a way that empowered rather than frightened them. Mr. Rodriguez's cafe had become an unofficial meeting spot for community police dialogue sessions. Officers would sit with students, sharing coffee and conversations about their experiences and perspectives. The walls were decorated with photos of these meetings, showing how simple conversations could build understanding. Barrett's case had moved through the justice system with appropriate speed and thoroughness. His trial had set new precedents for police accountability, and his conviction sent a clear message that abuse of power would have consequences. But the story wasn't about punishment, it was about positive change. Destiny's tutoring program had grown into something bigger. She now led workshops teaching other students how to be community advocates. It's not enough to know your rights, she told her students. You need to know how to stand up for them with dignity and purpose. The retired judge who had witnessed the incident now volunteered his time, teaching legal education classes at the community center. Knowledge is power, he would tell his students, but how you use that knowledge matters even more. Local businesses had formed a community watch network that worked cooperatively with police. They shared security footage when needed, but more importantly, they helped build relationships between officers and the neighborhoods they served. The police chief had kept his promises. Monthly public meetings allowed citizens to voice concerns directly to department leadership. Officers received regular training in de-escalation techniques, and body camera footage was reviewed not just for incidents, but for examples of positive community interaction. Back in the city council chambers, Destiny introduced her latest initiative, a scholarship program for students interested in careers in public service, law enforcement, or community advocacy. We're not just talking about change anymore, she explained. We're investing in it. The local news crews who had covered the original incident were back, but this time they were reporting on success stories. They filmed officers playing chess with students in the park, joining community cleanup events, and participating in youth mentoring programs. Mrs. Peterson's library had become a hub for community education. She had created a special section dedicated to civil rights history and civic engagement. These books aren't just about the past, she would tell visitors. They're tools for building a better future. The story had attracted national attention, not for the initial incident, but for what came after. Other cities sent representatives to study how this community had turned a moment of potential crisis into an opportunity for lasting change. As Destiny concluded her presentation to the city council, she looked out at the faces in the crowd. There were police officers sitting next to teachers, business owners next to students, all working together to maintain the positive changes they had created. 6 months ago, I was just a student walking home from tutoring, she said. Today, we're all teachers and students, learning how to make our community stronger. This isn't the end of our story, it's just the beginning of a new chapter. The room erupted in applause, but it wasn't just celebration. It was a commitment to continue the work they had started. The incident that could have divided their community had instead united it, proving that positive change was possible when people worked together with purpose and determination.